This man was responsible for the death of up to 1 million people in Nazi-controlled Croatia. It was one of the worst atrocities of the ethnic cleansing in World War II. His name, Andrea Artukovic, Nazi Minister of the Interior in Croatia. He arrived in Ireland in July 1947. In July 1944, this man commanded an SS unit responsible for some of the bloodiest actions of the German occupation in France. His name, Celestin Lane, commander of the Breton SS militia. He arrived in Ireland in December 1947. This man murdered hundreds of Jews in wartime Poland, often burying his victims alive. Even today, no Jew lives in the villages he visited. His name, Peter Menton, SS Scharführer. He arrived in Ireland in February 1963. In 1945, as a naive 16-year-old, I joined the Royal Air Force and was sent to Burma at the end of the war against the Japanese. On leave in Ireland, we couldn't wear our uniform because of our neutrality, something that irritates me still. When I returned home from the Royal Air Force in 1947, people who were part of the Nazi terror were being allowed into Ireland. Former collaborators and Nazis, some of whom were actually involved in the Holocaust, were seeking asylum in Ireland. And official Ireland seemed to give a greater welcome to Nazis and former collaborators than they did to returning war veterans. Come with me then on my travels as I try to find out who these Nazis were, where they came from, and how they got into Ireland. Rathgar in Dublin is a strange place to begin my hunt for Nazis, but in 1947, this quiet, leafy suburb became the hideaway of the man responsible for the death of up to 1 million people in wartime Croatia, Andrej Artukovic. In Los Angeles in 1985, Artukovic, now a frail old man, was extradited from the United States to Yugoslavia for war crimes. Over the course of his extradition, it was discovered that Ireland had provided him a safe haven as he fled from Allied justice. Artukovic was one of the architects of the Holocaust. He belonged to a Nazi regime which began the final solution in Croatia even before the Germans began the slaughter of Jews. It was to reach an apex of genocide in places like Auschwitz. I have come to Croatia to learn about his crimes. When the Germans overran Yugoslavia in 1941, they established a puppet state in Croatia for their pre-war allies, the Ustasha Party. The Ustasha were a right-wing Catholic group which ruled the Nazi-backed independent state of Croatia between 1941 and 1945.
The Ustasha movement was an extreme right-wing nationalist movement which emerged out of the University of Zagreb in the 1930s. And its basic ideology was that it believed in a greater Croatia which would be independent from Yugoslavia and would be cleansed of all racial minorities, Gypsies, Jews and especially Serbs. Artukovic was the Minister of the Interior, and he was really in charge of all the internal affairs of the state. He was very, very prominent, for example, in the instigation of the Holocaust in Croatia. In February 1942, when the Ustasha opened their parliament, he gave one of the maiden speeches And he actually said that the Croatian regime was going to deal more ruthlessly with the Jews than the Germans had. He referred to the Jews as parasites who were living off the blood of the honest Croatian worker and the honest Croatian peasant. And this is really the signal that the Holocaust is going to start.
We know Artukovic was a deeply religious man. While in Ireland, he attended Mass daily at the Church of the Three Patrons in Rathgar. For Artukovic and the Ustasha, their Catholicism was bound up in the fabric of their movement.
Most of them were Catholics. Many of them had been to seminary schools as well. They really tried to portray themselves as true Catholic sons. For example, they make abortion punishable by death, both for the doctor and the woman seeking the abortion. Drunkenness is banned. Swearing is punishable by a fine or internment in a camp. And of course, the Catholic papers love this. They think this is brilliant. Even when the Ustasha movement decided that they want to convert Serbs to Catholicism, again, this is something which the Catholic Church is very sympathetic to. It suddenly feels true Catholic values are coming back to Croatia and everything's going to be so much better.
The Ustasha set about creating their racially pure Catholic state. To do this, they looked for the support of the Catholic Church.
One of the most infamous clerical supporters of the Ustashas was the Archbishop of Sarajevo, Ivan Šarić. He really kind of endorses the Holocaust. He says, you know, sometimes you have to use tough measures against people and there are limits to God's love, which is really saying, actually, it will be okay to kill all the Jews, it won't matter.
This support from the Catholic Church would later help Artukovic get into Ireland as he escaped justice for his crimes. In 1942, such thoughts were far from Artukovic's mind as he set about cleansing the Croatian state. In Zagreb, I meet historian Ivo Goldstein, an expert on the Holocaust in Croatia. So, Ivo, what would Artukovic's role have been in the terror?
Well, he was one of the promoters of the system of terror. He, as Minister of the Interior, he signed the racial laws. He was in the organization of the concentration camps. The system was orientated versus the Serbs, the Jews, the Roma population, and all those Croats who were regarded as a real or possible threat to the regime.
The main concentration camp in Croatia was called the Jasenovac concentration camp. Now, this wasn't one camp, this is a complex of many different camps. It wasn't just Serbs in these camps, also Jews, Gypsies, communists, and anyone who really opposed the Ustasha regime. The prisoners were taken out to work, did really work that would kill them. Hard labor really wouldn't qualify what it was. They lived on starvation rations. Many of the prisoners just collapsed and died. The Ustashas also tried to poison a large number of prisoners. And, you know, it was a daily occurrence that prisoners would be made to line up, and they would be taken out, and some would be selected, and they would just be shot on the spot. One of the unique and horrible things that the Ustasha movement does is it actually establishes concentration camps specifically for children, and it tries to poison the children in these camps, and that's one of their main methods of actually killing people, is just starving and poisoning them to death. I think it's really important to understand that Ustasha method of slaughter in Jasenovac was not methodical, it was not very efficient, and there's a really strong element of sadism and torture to it. It wasn't just actually killing someone, it was about posing for photographs, torturing them, psychological damage. And there's so many infamous stories. I mean, there's one story where a father was made to actually kill his own son and then bury him before he too was executed. And these stories are very common.
The horrific crimes of the Ustasha turned the Croatian people against the regime. Many joined Marshal Tito's communist partisan army. Slavko Goldstein fought with the resistance. He witnessed the brutality of the Ustasha at first hand.
There was an Orthodox church near the area where my unit operated. And in this church, they burned about, some say, between 80 and 150 people. Burned alive. And we came there and we found some traces, such things, keys and so, from the people. So we knew what happened, of course.